January 31st, 1921, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. A lighthouse keeper spots something impossible through his telescope. A massive schooner, all sails set, run perfectly aground on the Diamond Shoals. When rescuers finally board the Carroll A Deering 2 days later, they find dinner still warm on the stove, navigational equipment missing, and every single crew member vanished without a trace. But what the Coast Guard discovered next would be classified for decades, and what they tried to hide might be even more disturbing than the disappearance itself. The Carroll A Deering was no ordinary vessel. This 255-foot, five-masted commercial schooner represented the peak of sailing technology in 1920. She'd been built just 2 years earlier in Bath, Maine, designed to carry cargo along the Atlantic coast. In August 1920, she departed Norfolk, Virginia, bound for Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal. Captain William Merritt commanded a crew of 10 men. Everything about this voyage should have been routine, but from the very beginning, something was wrong. Captain Merritt fell ill in Delaware, forcing the ship to find a replacement. Enter Captain Willis Wormel, an experienced seaman brought out of retirement for one last voyage. Wormel took command, but crew records show he immediately clashed with his first mate, Charles McClellan. Multiple witnesses in Rio reported heated arguments between the two men. One dock worker later told investigators that McClellan had openly threatened the captain. The tension was palpable when the Deering departed Rio on December the 2nd, heading home. They would reach Barbados by January 9th. And that's where the story takes its first disturbing turn. In Barbados, Captain Wormel went ashore and did something unusual. He visited the American consul and expressed concerns about his first mate and chief engineer. The consul's notes, declassified in 1985, record Wormel saying his crew had become impossible to manage and that McClellan was acting insubordinate. Wormel requested the consul help him replace these men. But here's what makes this chilling. The consul refused. He told Wormel to resolve it himself. The Deering departed Barbados on January 9th. That was the last time anyone would see the captain or crew alive. Fast forward to January 29th. The Deering passes the Cape Lookout lightship off North Carolina. A crewman, not the captain, which is highly irregular, shouts through a megaphone that the ship has lost its anchors. Before the lightship can respond, the Deering sails away. 2 days later, she's spotted aground. When the Coast Guard finally boards on February 4th, they document a scene frozen in time. Food prepared but not eaten. The ship's clock stopped at 4:30. Personal belongings left behind. Captain's cabin ransacked. All navigational instruments, logs, and papers removed. The crew's quarters stripped of personal effects. And most bizarrely, the ship's 2 lifeboats missing, but no evidence they'd been properly launched. The Coast Guard launched what would become one of the largest maritime investigations in American history. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, followed dozens of leads, and found absolutely nothing. But recently declassified documents reveal something the public was never told. 6 other ships vanished in the same area during the same 2-week period. The Coast Guard suspected piracy, but here's the twist. They also considered something else. Internal memos reference unusual circumstances and matters of national security. One document explicitly orders investigators to downplay certain findings. What were they covering up? Theory 1. Prohibition pirates. 1921 was the height of Prohibition. The waters off Cape Hatteras were infested with rum runners and hijackers. Some investigators believed the crew mutinied, killed the captain, then sailed to a rendezvous point to sell the ship to bootleggers. The missing lifeboats could have carried them to shore. But this theory has a fatal flaw. The Deering carried coal, not liquor. She had no valuable cargo worth murdering for, unless the cargo was never the target. Theory 2, this is where it gets dark. We're talking Soviet agents. Documents declassified in 2005 reveal that Coast Guard intelligence believed Russian operatives were active along the Atlantic coast in 1921. The Carroll A. Deering's route took her past sensitive military installations. One investigator's notes suggest the crew may have witnessed something they shouldn't have. Another memo references a foreign vessel spotted near the Deering's last known position. Could the crew have been taken prisoner or eliminated? The government's sudden classification of documents in 1922 suggests they found something they didn't want public. Theory 3. Natural disaster. Cape Hatteras is called the graveyard of the Atlantic for good reason. Sudden storms are common. Some maritime experts argue the crew abandoned ship during a severe storm, believing she was sinking. The missing navigation equipment could have been grabbed in a panic, but survivors from other shipwrecks reported no major storms that week, and this still doesn't explain the warm food, the methodical removal of papers, or the other vanished ships. Here's what we know for certain. 11 men vanished. The government classified their findings, and they never reopened the case, despite mounting evidence of something beyond simple misfortune. In 1924, a bottle washed ashore in North Carolina, containing a note allegedly from the Deering's engineer, claiming they'd been captured by pirates. Handwriting experts said it was authentic. The Coast Guard called it a hoax and closed the investigation permanently. To this day, the Carroll A. Deering rests in pieces along the Diamond Shoals. Her cargo was salvaged, her timbers scattered by a century of storms. But her crew, they exist only as names in archived documents and classified files. 11 souls who sailed into oblivion, leaving behind only questions and a government that insists there's nothing more to tell. So what really happened aboard the Carroll A. Deering? Was it mutiny, murder, or something far stranger? What was the Coast Guard hiding, and why does it remain classified even now? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you think one ghost ship is disturbing, wait until you hear about the lighthouse where 3 men vanished, leaving behind an open door and 2 overturned chairs. That story is next.